2 years since its historic vote for equal marriage, how has the country changed for its LGBTQ population? Has the increased visibility brought about through the referendum made a difference, or do old prejudices still prevail? Throughout this series, we'll highlight the breadth and colour of our community, our successes and supports, our talents and trailblazers, and discuss what it's like to be LGBTQ in Ireland.
My name is David Roche, and I am the CEO stroke manager of the Cork Gay Community Development Project. The objectives and overview have changed dramatically over the period. I suppose we would have evolved from in a much darker days. We would have evolved in, pre-decriminalisation, the AIDS crisis. That would have been our genesis. So it was from a very poor perspective, and it was a very negative responding to crises, I suppose. Over the years, the project has worked tirelessly. Not just myself, I'm standing on the shoulders of amazing men who went before me to achieve decriminalisation, etc. And the build up to last year, I suppose, marriage, or the year before now, for marriage. But the objectives, I suppose, still are the same at their core, and that is that we are, you're probably aware that Cork is different anyway, but in Cork we have a men's project and a women's project, so we've two separate, we work very closely together, but we're separate projects. So our aims and objectives really are to ensure that gay men and their families, gay and bisexual men and their families, can fully participate in the social, economic, cultural and political goods and life of their city and region.
And when did it come about? When was it founded?
The project, I suppose, has always existed in one form or other from the late 80s. I mean, its genesis would go right back to early work in the Key Co-op. And even before that, in the early 70s, you had groupings of gay men like the Cork Naturalist Club and other groups. Some of those men are still involved. Arthur Leahy, for example, John Callan, people like that are still involved. So the project has always kind of had some connection. There's been a longevity to it. But in its current format, in the current structure, I suppose you could trace it directly back to about 92.
And have you found the role of the agency or the services you provide have changed as society has become more accepting?
I suppose, first of all, that notion of society being more accepting is something we might need to explore. I think if you live in, that lovely bubble of Dublin or Cork, maybe to some lesser degree Galway, Limerick, but Dublin and Cork specifically, you may have a false notion of how integrated we've become. I think in Cork and Dublin, yes, you would see that. It's a very open and safe space now, and that's really, to be welcomed. But if you go outside the city, as I do frequently, I live outside the city, I live in a very rural area, where things have changed because I'm there, so I don't notice it. Again, that's a bubble. But if I go to work in a school in Clonakilty, Cantork and Macroom, for example, I very quickly see the Ireland of 20 years ago. This stuff hasn't really rippled out, that notion that a rising tide lifts all boats. It may, but the tide's coming in very slowly in certain parts of the country. So that notion of acceptance, I think, is something that we need to just to maybe check in with ourselves every so often. Also, I think that a lot of the organisations, ourselves included, would have focused very heavily for a year or two, because it wasn't just a few-month campaign, it wasn't just all the postering, there was years of build-up to it. But particularly for the last 2 years and the last year intensely, the organisations almost focused exclusively on marriage, with the result that a lot of our work was put on the long finger. And we suddenly realise post-referendum now, because there is a kind of a hangover, there is a withdrawal of energy, there's a withdrawal of adrenaline, and it left us with this kind of uncomfortable vacuum about where do we go now? Because it's not sorted. There's a lot of stuff, a lot of issues. My desk every day is filled with problems. But then we were left with that vacuum. And for me, I suppose, marriage, while it was absolutely essential, I mean, there's no argument there, and it secured people's futures, including my own, because I have a little future left, it didn't do much for our present. It may have raised awareness, but it may have also put pressure on people. There is a notion now that it's okay to come out. There is a notion now that it's safe to come out. There is a notion now that you shouldn't be feeling bad about yourself. You shouldn't be feeling bad about your identity. And that's all very well if you're Dave Roche, who's erudite and supported and working in a gay project. But if I'm Johnny and I'm 15, that false sense of security, and I decide to tell everybody in West Cork, that's a responsibility I personally don't want to have, So I think we need to just check in with ourselves again about where we are exactly and about the work that still has to be done with hearts and minds. The referendum was amazing. It was a resounding success. But has it affected everybody equally? I'm not so sure.
Is it hard to drum up support in the community or keep the momentum going since the referendum? Do you feel like people have taken a step back and gone, oh, we're sorted now?
I agree. I think that there was a feeling amongst us, those of us who were heavily involved, that this was going to be a new start, that there was going to be all this new energy, this new voluntary activity, this new awareness in the community that we could somehow harness post-referendum and put it into our other work. And unfortunately, that has just not happened. It just disappeared completely. There is a sense, not only in wider community and it's at government level, but also within the community, that it's sorted, it's done. And those people who may, who had the resources to actually go knocking on doors and stand on bridges and having those conversations on video and in social, maybe for them it is. I personally, despite being out for years and being involved for years, still had a bit of growth to do, and it was only during the referendum I realised it. So maybe for those people it is, but there's a lot of people we've left behind, and we need to watch that. We need to go back and deal with that. So there's been a huge withdrawal of energy, a huge expenditure of energy during the campaign, but it was a failing, I think, of us, those who were active in the community, to harness that.
Mm-hmm. And what is next? How do we go about moving forward?
For me, I suppose there are two burning issues. Again, education for me is always going to be key. I think that if every school in the country and every primary and national school in the country took up their responsibility in providing a balanced education for people, then you could probably wipe out a lot of the problems LGBT people have over 1 or 2 generations, quite frankly. I know that sounds very simplistic, but that's the vision. So I would endeavour to work very hard with the education system in my area. The second thing I think we often don't talk about, and I think it's only coming onto our radars now, is that the generation who started this work, we mentioned them earlier on, the people who were involved in the Cork Naturalist Club in the 70s, etc., are the first population anywhere in the world. We don't have any models anywhere in the world. They're the first population to age as an out population. So there is this whole cohort of men and women who are going to be retiring soon. And we don't know what their healthcare needs are going to be like, what their housing needs are going to look like. So I think we need to have a look at how being gay and grey in Ireland is going to pan out. So I think there is that. Because for a lot of people, unfortunately, marriage came too late. I mean, we all know the horror stories of people who were widowed or widowed pre-marriage and the horrendous situations and legal cases around pensions, etc., that I'm sure you're aware of in Dublin particularly. So I think that's an area that we need to be looking at. And I and my colleagues are looking at it very closely. I'm not sure how that's going to look, being honest with you. Despite being a fairy, I don't have a wand and I can't make it all right, but it's something I'm very aware of and that we're going to have to look at very soon.
Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
I'm Anthony Kinnan, I'm an actor and I'm a gay man. Life for a jobbing actor is never dull. You're always looking for your next job. You're always feeling insecure about, well, you're only as good as your last job, so you're kind of like always getting out there auditioning, put all the preparation in for your audition, and then, getting close and maybe not getting it or getting it, and then you worry about, oh, now I have to do this thing. So it's always interesting.
Is there an issue, do you think, like being a gay man and being an actor, do you get typecast, or do you think that could stand in the way of you getting certain types of roles?
I think in the industry in Ireland, being a gay man is okay. Especially when you're coming up from maybe amateur circuits, a lot of gay people tend towards the performing arts. I think it's about expression or maybe trying to be something different, or that kind of experimentation with performativity or whatever. So I think it was always been a safe space to be gay in the theatre world and the art world, the kind of world that tries to push these issues forward, put them out into the fore as well, so that's okay. But as far as stereotyping, I think for any actor you need to be able to be versatile and play whatever. And obviously most of the roles I've played have been for straight men. But whether I'm going to be given a role that's a big hulking bruiser of a guy, well, no, but that's just not my cast type anyway. So I wouldn't necessarily put that down to the fact that I'm gay. I think you can get typecast, but I think that would more happen to a person who maybe is better known than I am, let's say. So, for example, I did a role in Red Rock last year, and that happened to be the role of a gay man. So, I don't know if I am in typecast, but that's the role I got. So, I suppose it's hard to say. Me personally, at the level that I'm at, I don't think I'll be getting typecast anytime soon.
When you get to the larger scale, like, do you think it's an understandable fear that, for maybe an actor who would be, big in Hollywood and things like that, that as soon as they come out, it could signal a kind of end of career? Because, there could be a thing of like if, when Anne Hesh came out as a lesbian, like the romantic comedy roles dried up because can she be believable as a love interest for a straight man?
Yeah, well, I think it's still difficult to be LGBT and out and an actor, but I certainly don't think it's as difficult as it used to be, or I don't think it's as difficult as some people make it out to be either.
Speaking of things getting better, how, since the referendum has passed, do you think it's affected you in a big way?
Since the referendum has passed, I think life has become a lot more boring. In a way, for somebody who fought in the campaign and was very invested in it, life was very much like a roller coaster for the few years beforehand, but especially the time of the actual referendum campaign. Speaking now as somebody who, since the referendum, has gotten married, we're living an increasingly boring lifestyle, which is great. There's things that we don't have to worry about anymore. There's things that we don't have to fight for anymore. So that's fantastic, and that's what we wanted. We wanted that boringness. We wanted that ordinariness. So I mean, we got what we wanted. That's not to say that there's still not a lot more to strive for in the space of LGBT rights, but I think overall in Ireland, I think it has gotten a lot better for LGBT people, and LGBT people feel more accepted here. But I think luckily, we could stand here in Ireland and say that Ireland is still a country who welcomes LGBT people and wants LGBT people. So I think I feel proud to be gay and Irish.
You did a lot with the marriage equality movement. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, myself and my partner Barry, we have been together. We're together nearly 18 years now, and we were joined in a civil partnership in Belfast in 2007. We moved to London for about 2 or 3 years, and while we were over there, we were investigating the possibility of becoming adoptive parents. And in 2010, we were faced with a pretty crappy decision to be, right, well, we can stay in London and perhaps maybe one day adopt in a few years' time, or we can go home and be with our family and friends. We were feeling a bit homesick, so we did want to go home. But that was a pretty difficult decision to make. Stay and maybe adopt, or move to Ireland, give up your rights, because at that stage, civil partnership still wasn't even enacted at that stage in Ireland, and give up your rights to adopt.
So, as an actor, what's your hopes for the future?
As an actor, my hopes for the future is to work. I'm currently just finished a show that I helped create and devise called Cracks, and it's about mental health issues. It's about a woman recovering from a suicide attempt, and she's suffering from depression and anxiety. I'm very proud of that, and I'm very pleased with that, so I'm looking forward to doing more of that and doing more of that kind of work that means something to me, and that hopefully might mean something to somebody who's in the audience as well. So yeah, that's the kind of work I'm interested in.
And that's more than that?
name is Anya Mackin. I'm an artist. I live in Dublin. A lot of my work is about femininity. I paint mostly in watercolour. I'm known to do performance art as well. To a vast majority, I use watercolour. I find that I really like the fluidity of it, and I started painting like a lot of very suggestive sexualized imagery or images of horror, or something that was kind of a bit racier for a watercolor subject, and that became a big influence then in the subject matter that I was using. So,
and do you like paint based on themes or series, or is it a piece by piece basis?
Generally, I did do a massive project over a course of 3 years where I painted over 300 paintings of people's faces in orgasm. But I was looking into lots of art history at the time, and there's a form of Rococo religious portraiture which is about people in the moment of religious ecstasy as well. So then I thought it might be kind of interesting to look at other points where people lose all sense of kind of decorum and how they should look and just kind of abandon themselves for an emotion, and what that would be like as a portrait. So then it became more about I suppose my own experience through my own sexuality and becoming a queer person, I suppose. So it became about like sexualized imagery and what kind of consuming that as a woman would mean.
Do you feel like a gay artist has a responsibility to address their sexuality in their work?
Only if they choose to publicly display that. It's always going to be about the strange little things that you pick up that you enjoy, or that you find intriguing or weird or upsetting. So when a person is queer or is gay and they are making work, it's going to be part of that because it does have an impact on how you're going to, navigate through life.
Could you just give us some information on how Art Clash came about and what was the idea behind that?
Art Clash came about, I suppose it was inspired by the fact that I didn't have a job in the recession. But it was also about the fact that I didn't want to just... I had been a temp for 7 years working in offices, and, that gets a bit repetitive. So I really wanted to kind of try and take something from my art and do something with it, and all of the contacts that I had who were all broke, and try and see if we could do something interesting. I wanted to open it up for people to actually experience it and see how much enjoyment and pleasure you can get out of making things, and for them to be able to meet people that they admire and work with them and see how they do what they do.
And just with the... I don't know if it's too soon to tell, but do you think, since things like the referendum, have many artists created work in response to it, or is it almost too soon to tell?
I can't see artists not reacting and responding to that. And, you could even see, like, immediately people started reacting and responding by Photoshop, like the easiest method. But I do think that will materialise. Like, I know directly after the referendum result, I went to San Francisco, and I was there for San Francisco Pride the day after the High Court ruling, so or the Supreme Court ruling, and the energy in San Francisco was unbelievable, but also the kind of projection of how they showed their pride was fascinating. So I took like 1 million photos at that, and I've painted a bunch of the people from that event. But I think it's interesting how somebody kind of can dress up in an outfit to reveal their pride. And I suppose my work is kind of going in that direction a bit, and it is kind of something I'm thinking about and engaged with in my current practice. So well, for me personally, it definitely has a massive impact.
And what is the future of Anya Mackin's work and Art Clash? Have we got more Art Clash coming up?
Yeah, so Twisted Pepper sadly closed down there, which had become a home for Art Clash. They loved us. They even installed like an entire new lighting system in the basement for us and everything. They were so good. So I think I'm just going to try and get it out there as much as possible, you know, because there's a real appetite for it. And I think the thing that's most rewarding about Art Clash for me personally is seeing these people that come there, and they come alone and they're curious about art, but they haven't tried it, and they're so happy leaving the place. It's just the most rewarding feeling. So I think that's what will keep me going at it, and I want people to experience and understand how enjoyable it can be to make something, that you can actually abandon all your kind of rational thought and worry and just throw stuff at a page for a while, you know, and it's fun.